This is a Film Stories original podcast.
This episode is brought to you by Nespresso and Samra Origins by the Weekend Coffee Collection.
Introducing Samra Origins. My collaboration with Nespresso is a connection to my roots, to my mother, Samra. Coffee that hits the right notes. It transports you. Crafted with unique notes and bold, soaring flavors. Experience a taste that moves you. Nespresso and Samra Origins.
Discover more at Nespresso.com.
Okay.
Welcome to the Japan on Film podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine, and today I am welcoming a new guest. The movie today is Happy Flight, which is both the same in English and in Japanese, directed by Shinobu Yaguchi from 2008. And my new guest today is Christopher Hood. Christopher, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing okay. My son is whining in the background, but my wife should be home soon to take care of him. Unfortunately, he's homesick, so you got to deal with this kind of stuff when you got kids here. But anyway, as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about Happy Flight. Though before we get into that, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so I'm a lecturer at university, currently Cardiff University, specializing in Japanese studies. I teach some Japanese language as well, but I basically do research about Japan, write books about Japan. I've written novels set in Japan. And in amongst all my various bits of research related to Japan, some of it has ended up being about some Japanese films and so on as well, which sometimes have just come from the research I've done in relation to, I've done research about the world's biggest single plane crash, which happened in Japan in 1985, and there's some movies related to that. And that then took me down the route of studying a whole load of Japanese disaster movies. And yeah, so that's kind of me in a nutshell, really.
So that's all really interesting stuff. Sounds like you've got a pretty varied career connected to Japan. So have you lived in Japan yourself?
Yep. So just for 1 year. So after graduating from university, I'd studied Japanese at university. I went and did the JET program for a year. And then after that, went back to university to do a PhD. So I've only had 1 year living in Japan so far, but I tend to get out to Japan once or twice every year. And this coming summer, I'm going out for the second time this year, and that will be my 50th trip to Japan.
Oh, wow. Very cool. Yeah, I'm a JET alumni myself too. I did the full 5 years and then just ended up staying around. So whereabouts in Japan do you usually go to when you come visit? And are these trips business, pleasure, or a mix of both?
Sometimes they're a mixture of both. So I had a research trip last July, but it started getting some bits which it's hard to draw the line sometimes between pleasure and research and so on. I sort of did this sort of a balancing out trip in January of this year, which was primarily holiday, but did a bit of research too. In terms of where I go, it's a matter of what my research is about. So when I've been doing research about the JAL plane crash of 85, because that happened in Gunma Prefecture, obviously that tends to take me there. But I've done a lot of research in relation to the Shinkansen bullet train, which takes me all across the country doing research on that. And in relation to Shinkansen, I'm going to put an early bid in for doing an episode with you on the Shinkansen Daibakuha, the 2025 version, which is due to be released in April of this year, which I just saw the advert for yesterday, which looks very good.
Okay.
So yeah, that's taken me all across the country at times. I've been to all 47 prefectures, but inevitably you get sucked back to the big cities like Tokyo and Osaka and so on quite a lot. It's just the nature of the beast.
Right, yeah. And what spurred this interest in Japanese research in the first place?
Okay, so I went to a high school in England, which was mostly for foreign students wanting to go to a British university. Made a lot of Japanese friends. And then one day, our head teacher said we need to be thinking about what to do at university. Came out from the meeting, bumped into one of my Japanese friends who said, "So, what are you going to do?" And I said, "Japanese, of course." And we just laughed. And then afterwards, I thought, actually, maybe not such a bad idea. And it kind of just went from there, really.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, it's funny how those little whims can end up, changing your entire life. That's how I ended up here. Actually, I saw the Jet booth, and I'm like, hey, I like Japanese movies. This might be fun for a year or two, and then just never left.
Yep, and that's basically also been how my research worked. I mean, I did my PhD about education reform and the influence of Prime Minister Nakasone, because obviously I've been on the inside of the system a little bit with the JET program. And then after that, I just, for whatever reason, I got an interest in the Shinkansen. So I did a book about that. And then a series of coincidences came together, which led me to doing research about the JAL crash. And my life has kind of just been like that. It just keeps evolving. And a lot of it just from little bizarre coincidences or just following hobbies and interests, whatever it may be.
Yeah, very interesting. And so what about Japanese movies? Like, obviously your research in Japan started from your connection with this high school and the Japanese fellow students you had there. But what about Japanese movies was first grabbed you, or what Japanese movie was the first one that really kind of spoke to you?
So you got to remember, I mean, my first trip to Japan was in 1989, and when I started at university later that year. And in those days in the UK, we still only had 4 terrestrial channels. I did not have access to satellite TV. Cable TV really isn't the thing in the UK compared to America. And so during my 4 years of being at university, I think we only had about 4 films were ever shown on UK terrestrial TV. It was also very difficult to get hold of them on videos. And essentially what we got was a lot of the Juzo Itami films.
Okay.
And I really love Tampopo, which I know you've done on a previous episode I've listened to. I actually prefer Ososhiki in some ways, but that may be because it's ended up linking in with some of my research. But I have to be honest, for a long time, I wasn't really into Japanese films. And when I started going to Japan more regularly, and ironically, for quite a long time, I was actually flying on Japan Airlines, I always used to watch the Japanese films, partly just to get, as I was flying to Japan, just get my brain into Japanese thinking mode a bit more. And I enjoyed the Suribaka Nishi stories, get how it's translated into English, but it was with Toshiyuki Nishida, where he's like goes around Japan basically fishing when he's meant to be doing work and so on. I enjoyed those, but most of the other Japanese films just reminded me why I didn't watch Japanese films. I just found them a little bit quirky and so on. Obviously, so many of them were based on having originally been manga and anime, so the boundaries of what can be done is a little bit different. And it wasn't until the 2000s that I really started to watch more Japanese films and start to enjoy them. I particularly enjoyed, I mean, of the Kurosawa ones, I've always enjoyed Tsubaki Sanjiro most, and even quite liked the color version remake, which was done in the 2000s. But it was really from 2008 onwards when I started watching some films related to my research. So there's a couple of movies related to the JAL crash, which I watched. And then it's kind of just gone from there. And obviously in recent years with Netflix and so on, although I initially was watching more TV shows, I've been starting to watch more Japanese films. One that was actually made by Netflix Japan, Zon 100, is probably now my favorite Japanese film. It's just so ridiculously funny and so on. And I'm kind of the opposite way around to most of my students. I'm coming to anime quite late. I always used to say I wasn't really into anime. I've started enjoying a few anime films. It's still not my go-to, but I get why people like it. It's one of those things where you just got to find the right storyline and so on, I guess. You can't write off the whole genre, but that's kind of been my journey with it all.
Okay, yeah, very cool. Yeah, very interesting that, Itami was kind of your introduction to Japanese movies, because most people, their introduction is something like anime is a very common introduction. But also like the classics like Kurosawa, or, some of a lot of guests I've had on the show were about my generation. We came up in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the J-horror craze was hitting the West. So that's a big entry point as well. But getting in through Itami is very interesting. And also, yeah, you're not wrong about a lot of the mainstream Japanese movies. There is, and you could say that about probably the mainstream genre in any, the mainstream movies in any country, really, like America, England, whatever it is. There is kind of a sameness to some of the mainstream stuff. Not that it can't still be entertaining, but there is definitely that aspect of it. And it's funny that you started getting into Japanese movies in 2008. That was actually when I came to Japan. So nice little coincidence there.
Sure.
And and like you too, like I've never been, I liked anime a little bit when I was a kid, but I was never like a big anime fan. Especially, many of the guests we have on, like I said, a lot of them come in through anime, but anime has just never really been my thing. There's, with some exceptions. So I'm definitely with you there. I've always gravitated more towards the live action stuff myself. Yeah. And so, like I said, today we are going to be talking about Happy Flight, 2008 film, also 2008. Nice coincidence there. About directed by Shinobu Yaguchi, and it's kind of like it's an ensemble piece, and it's so we go back and forth between these different characters who are working for ANA. ANA actually was involved in the production of this film, and they even sponsored a giveaway with DVDs and other items to certain members of their mileage club. And so we follow a few different characters. We follow Suzuki, who is a co-pilot who is trying to qualify to become a captain. We also follow Etsuko, who is a young flight attendant on her first international flight. And there's also Kimura, who is part of the ground staff. She's like, I'm not sure what their name is, but one of the people the attendants who they handle the checking you in and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and, ground staff is the standard term. Yeah.
What was that?
Ground staff is the standard term.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then we also have a little bit about the ground crew as well, where there's an issue with the plane. So one of the workers who's working on the plane feels like he might be, he might have left one of his tools inside of it. So there's all these different, and it cuts back and forth and throughout all these different stories. Now, what is your history with this film? Have you seen this before, or was this kind of your first time watching it?
So I did not know about this film at all until literally 2 months or so ago, I think, which is really bizarre because, as I've intimated already, I have an aviation interest in relation to Japan. I mean, I've been researching the JAL crash since 2007, so I've been working on that for 18 years now. But from 2011, 12 onwards, I've been looking at when things go right rather than things go wrong. So I spent a lot of time visiting airline companies. In 2013, I did a trip to Japan where I basically went, other than one or two major Japanese airlines, I went to all their headquarters. I flew on them all, whole range of things. So I've had this interest in aviation. How I missed Happy Flight, I do not know. And so my first introduction to it was actually hearing you mention it in one of your episodes. You mentioned it almost in passing. I was just like, what is this Happy Flight thing? And looked it up. And it was just by chance that around that time I was watching a series which had just dropped on Netflix, even though it was from 2005, called Good Luck. And I actually found it very interesting watching these two things almost back to back, because both of them are set at ANA, and neither of them show ANA in a very good light. Good Luck slightly better than Happy Flight. I mean, this is it's the most mistitled film I've watched in a long time. There is nothing happy about this flight at all, other than the fact they actually managed to land it at the end of the flight. Sorry for the spoilers for anybody who's not watched it. It strikes me as a very strange title. So as I said, I didn't know it existed 2 months ago. Now I've watched it twice in the last couple of months because I watched it initially when we started saying we'd do the episode, and then I rewatched it at the end of last week, just to sort of go through and jot some notes down and things like that.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. We'll talk about the title and the way that ANA is portrayed, which is kind of surprising that ANA did produce this film. I wonder if they were. Well, I mean, they did include giveaways of the DVDs with their mileage club, but I wonder, how happy they were with the end result. But anyway, I first came across this movie a few years ago. My wife is Japanese, and she's a big movie buff herself, so she will often, bring home Japanese movies. She's like, "Oh, let's give this a try." And Happy Flight was one of them. And I watched it, wasn't expecting anything really, and I was surprised at like how kind of charming and enjoyable it is as a film. It's got some really fun performances. I mean, this isn't like some deep introspective look into Japanese society or anything like that, but it's a fun movie. It's a brisk pace. It's only 102 minutes, so it's not that long too. And it, because there's always something happening on the screen, that you never really feel bored when you're watching it. And as I mentioned, this is directed by Shinobu Yaguchi, who is he's done a bunch of different films. I think you said that we'd mentioned this on passing. That was possibly in when we did the movie on Survival Family, which was a really interesting movie he did about when all electricity just shuts down, and it's about this family as they try and go across the country. And he's probably most known for Swing Girls, which is which we also covered here a while back, and that's this based on a true story about a bunch of high school girls who form a jazz band in a rural area. He's also probably really known for Water Boys, which a bunch of boys who are trying to create a synchronized swimming team at their high school, which was hugely popular. I mean, me personally, I was not a fan of Water Boys. I've watched it like once, and I didn't really care much for it. But he's done some other movies. Swing Girls I thought was fun, but it's not my favorite of that kind of genre. I think Linda is a much better movie than Swing Girls, but it's still a fun film. But the other ones I've seen Robo G, which was kind of meh, wasn't that great. But Wood Job, Survival Family, and Happy Flight, those are the ones that really kind of spoke to me the most. Probably Wood Job being my favorite of them, with this young man going to join a forestry program when he's not able to get a decent job after university. How about you? Do you know much about Yaguchi's work?
The only one out of all of them, other than Happy Flight, I've seen is Survival Family, which I watched on a flight going to Japan. I enjoyed it enough that I watched it on the return flight back to the UK, and I have watched that subsequently as well. My feeling on Survival Family, I rewatched recently as a comparison with Zom 100, because they're both dealing with an apocalyptic type situation, which they don't really know what the cause is, but the reactions are very different in terms of how to deal with it. And I found the comparison quite intriguing. I like Survival Family and I like Happy Flight, but I don't like the way either of them are branded, because I think they are enjoyable watches. They are entertaining. I think Survival Family's got a little bit more, obviously, to get you thinking about what would you do in this situation and so on. Happy Flight is just entertainment. I don't like how either of them are branded as being comedies, because I think they're actually dramas with a little bit of comedy here and there, rather than being lots of comedy with a bit of drama. If you wanted to do comedy, I think both of them with a different script writer could have been much funnier. I mean, they're both comedies in the sense that they are ridiculous situations. The way people behaving is ridiculous, but I'm not rolling on my sofa laughing for an hour and 40 minutes or whatever with either of these films. There are bits which make me chuckle.
Yeah, I had the same reaction, especially to Survival Family. Like that was really kind of branded as like a comedy, but when you watch it, it's actually fairly serious, fairly straightforward the entire time.
It's pretty dark. It's pretty dark at times.
Yeah. Happy Flight, it's a little bit, it's much lighter, and I think you can get away with calling this a comedy. I kind of think of it. Have you ever watched I mentioned this last episode too, but have you ever watched the TV show Scrubs?
Yes.
It gives me kind of a Scrubs vibe, where it's like this workplace situation. You got kind of these crazy things happening. You have kind of these big personalities, and you know, the comedy comes from like most of those personalities and their interactions and their reactions to these situations. But the situations themselves are actually fairly serious, and so I did get a bit of a Scrubs vibe. And Scrubs is one of my all-time favorite TV shows. That might be why I really kind of dug this movie a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I enjoyed it, but I think I was watching part of the issue for me because I have done research. This, as we said, this is very much set at A&A. There's no hiding from it. It is all A&A. This movie. You don't, I think, even ever get to see a JAL play, or maybe in the background at one point you can just about see a JAL play. But basically, this is A&A through and through. I think because of that, I was watching it at times with my very much that part of my research brain switched on. So I was looking for things where I was sort of thinking, no, that wouldn't happen. And I think that was taking away some of the enjoyment. And I think particularly my first watching, I did it. The second time round, I was a little bit more relaxed about it. But it also meant that because of the research I'd done, I could understand the movie's role in the context of where A&A was and that point of its history and what it was going to be trying to achieve in the coming years and so on. So I found that side of it interesting.
Yeah, that's always the risk when you're watching movies about some sort of situation that you were very familiar with, like when they get something wrong or when they, you know, fudge things for dramatic effect or whatever the case may be, it stands out to you very much. I know nothing about the airline industry other than just having flown a lot, but that's about it. So for me, it was very interesting to watch, and I didn't notice any of that. I didn't pick up on any of that stuff. Although one of the things that did kind of stand out to me was just how easy it is for something to go wrong, and how many moving parts there are in a flight operation, that it is amazing that we have as few plane crashes as we do, given all the different moving parts you have throughout the entire thing.
Sure. And I mean, I think to some degree, I mean, you sort of refer to the maintenance issue. They have to really push the boundaries of believability to actually come up with any sort of hint of a scenario of what could possibly go wrong in one case and so on, which just points to how well the operations of most airline companies are done on a day-to-day basis.
And I wonder if how much of that, like, very kind of limited to what they felt they could do in result to, like, you know, something going wrong with the plane was a result from ANA being like, no, you can't do that because that'll reflect badly on our company or something along those lines. Because in this case, you know, it seems like it might have been the ground crew guy, but we find out that no, it wasn't him. Instead, it was the birds that caused this whole problem. So then it's the fault of the bird patrol guy, who is not working for the airline. He's working for the airport. So then we can blame it on him instead.
Yeah. I think there's certainly a degree of that. I mean, A&A would have had to sign off on the final version of the film. I mean, I know from research I've done on movies related to the JAL crash, one of them is based on the novel by Hideo Yokoyama, and he was given a private viewing of the film and asked to approve of basically the movie that they had made. His viewing was 44 days before the film was due to hit the cinema. So I mean, if he had said he didn't like it, they would have had big problems. But although there were certain things he didn't like, he basically said, yeah, leave it as it is and so on. So, I mean, A&A would have to sign off it. I suspect at one level it wasn't that difficult for them to sign off on because of the fact that, I mean, as I said, I wasn't rolling around laughing my head off or anything. but it's all just so ridiculous. I don't think it ends up reflecting badly on A&A. If it would have been a film which was meant to be a little bit more fly on the wall, and this is what it's like to become a captain and the challenges, I think that's when people would be going, oh, is there workplace bullying in A&A, and is this how people behave? I think people then would have started questioning what A&A is like, but for most of this film, people just go, oh, this is just so stupid. Presumably it's not really like this at A&A, and would just dismiss any concerns.
Well, also too, you have the head flight attendant, Yamazaki too, where there's that whole scene in the beginning when Etsuko's friends are telling her like, "Oh yeah, when you work with her, you have to drink a lot of water because she's going to make you cry all the time." And then you see her, and yeah, she's a bit, she's a bit of a strong taskmaster, but she's not like, she's not portrayed as like, as a monster at all. It's like she is, there are points where she seems to defer to Etsuko, or she like, tells her good job. So she comes off. So yeah, they definitely kind of, and same thing with the captain Harada. Like I put in my notes here that he's kind of an ass, but there's also that scene where he makes the joke about how if something goes wrong, it's all Suzuki's fault, and nobody laughs. And then the Etsuko says like, "Okay, yes, I'll make sure to tell him that." And he's like, no, that was a joke. And just like,
yeah. that was actually one of my favorite. That was actually one of my favorite bits of the whole film, because having met so many pilots, including A&A pilots, that was just so believable to me that they have this incredibly dry sense of humor. And I just thought, yeah, that's the sort of thing that I recognize. And just the way that, as you said, the cabin crew sort of reacted to, I just thought was particularly enjoyable.
Yeah. But still, like, as the movie goes on, you realize that no, he is there to help Suzuki become a better pilot. So they soften the characters who in another movie that's probably not backed by A&A would probably be portrayed in a worse light. And I haven't had much firsthand experience with pilots, but I have had it with flight attendants, especially future flight attendants. There was one semester where I taught at a girls' college, and the majority of the students there were studying to be flight attendants. That was their end goal. And Haruka Ayase, who plays Etsuko, completely reminds me of those girls. Like she's got this really kind of like bubbling, like outgoing personality that's like, she's infectiously adorable throughout the entire movie. And that was what most of these girls were at this school where I worked at, who are all studying to be flight attendants.
Yeah, I've had both exchange students from Japan who've gone on to become cabin crew, including one time they were on the flight that I was taking when I wasn't expecting it. I've also had some of my own students go on to be cabin crew, including one who about 2 years ago became the first ever foreigner at JAL to be promoted to chief purser. So,
oh wow,
yeah, I've seen sort of cabin crew, and obviously from visiting various Japanese like companies, airline companies, and sort of going to the bits which passengers don't normally get to see. You just see the interactions of the cabin crew and so on. And there were certainly elements which were just very believable. It's just there were other bits where they were just so unbelievable that I think it just it makes it easier, I think, as I said, for A&A to sign off on this and sort of say, look, no one's going to be taking this too seriously, so we don't need to worry. And I think this is part of the I think it's useful to be thinking about the context of where A&A was, because originally JAL was the only airline which was allowed to do international flights. JAL could do also domestic flights, but A&A was for a long time restricted only to doing domestic flights. And their history originally is actually, I don't know if you know this, but originally they were actually only a helicopter company. And that's why
I didn't know that.
Their flight codes. So although we usually abbreviate down to A&A as the 3-letter code, their 2-letter code is NH, and the NH stands for Nippon Helicopter, because that's what the original name of the company was. But going into the 1990s and beyond, particularly because JAL had problems with the crash in 1985, and JAL was also moving to becoming fully private, so no longer partly owned by the government, the old system was got rid of. So A&A was allowed to start doing international flights as well as domestic. And going into the 2000s, ANA set the target of becoming Japan's number one airline. And so I think it's quite telling that in 2005, we've got the previously mentioned TV series, Good Luck. 2008, we've got this movie Happy Flight coming out, which comes out in the same year that Climbers High, the movie, comes out. This is the one about the Japanese. So these two things happen at the same time. We got ANA starting to put Pokemon on their planes, and subsequently they've had things like whale designs. They've moved on to do Star Wars. They've just become the fun, exciting airline in Japan, and they are now Japan's biggest airline in terms of market share and so on. So it all really is starting to change around the time that this film comes out and so on, that this is ANA sort of saying, we're going to be bigger and better and more fun than JAL, because JAL's always seemed a little bit sterile and cold in comparison to at least ANA of the 21st century.
Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting history. I did not know all that stuff. And I also didn't know that ANA had now become like the top airline in Japan. It's very fascinating. So do you have a preference for ANA or JAL, since you've flown on both of them?
I mean, despite the accident in 1985, I'm actually Team JAL. I've used ANA a few times and I've had no issue with them at all. But I've always had, not always, most of the time I've had very good service with JAL. And I'm a sucker for the logo. I know that. So at the time of Happy Flight, if you do see a JAL plane in the background, it's when they were using the Hinomaru design on the Japanese flag sort of circle on the back. But I do love the sort of the crane shape, which they originally had, got rid of, and have returned to essentially that design. I do like that design. And I've got many Japanese friends who say how they prefer ANA, because they say, if you go on ANA and the cabin crew smile, it's as though it's genuine. Whereas with JAL cabin crew, they've been like programmed to smile to a particular situation. I'm like, can you really tell the difference here? I mean, a smiling person is a smiling person. You've no idea what's really going through their head. I don't get that. I love ANA though; they are fun. I do like all the fancy designs they do with their planes. I mean, JAL and others do it as well, but ANA is a lot of fun. But generally, JAL is also the cheaper of the two for flying between the UK and Japan. So I tend to end up on JAL if I use one of the Japanese airlines.
Yeah, I've mostly flown on JAL between the two. Like I've done ANA a few times, but most of the time I'm using those big airlines when I'm going internationally. And domestically, I try to stick to the low cost carriers just because obviously they're low cost.
But most of either the hybrid carriers or the low cost carriers, ANA is involved with those. Jetstar Japan is backed by JAL, but Peach is ANA.
I didn't know that.
And the hybrid carriers, you got Skymark, you got Airdo, and you got SolarSeed. Those are all backed by ANA. They do the maintenance and training and stuff like that. ANA is basically everywhere these days.
Wow, that's fascinating. I didn't know that. I haven't flown on ANA directly that often. Like I have done JAL a few times internationally. Most of the times when I go internationally, we're usually getting assistance from my mother, who has a lot of points from when she was working and flying a lot. So, and most of that ends up being unfortunately, with the American airlines, which are nowhere near as good as the Japanese ones. Although my favorite, yeah, it's but I think the best one I've flown on though was probably Korean Air of all the airlines I've ever flown on. Korean Air it's been a long time since I have, but when I did fly on them, it was always an amazingly pleasant experience. Very, very friendly, very compassionate staff, and the service was wonderful. I don't have anything to back this up, but I'm pretty sure their seats are more comfortable too than the American ones. Also, free booze for the entire international flight. With the American ones, they still charge you for that stuff.
One time when I used American Airlines on a long distance international flight, they tried to charge me $1 for the headphones, and it's just like, come on, I've spent so much on the airfare. You're going to charge me a single dollar for the headphones? Are you kidding me?
I know. And they're these crappy headphones that'll cost like 50 cents. It's ridiculous. But I will say too, like a few years ago, we flew with my daughter it was right before her first birthday. And it was technically an American Airlines flight, but it was run by JAL. So it was like JAL staff, and all that. And they were great. Like they gave us a free car seat to put in for everything like that. But then about 2 years ago, we flew on United, and they said, "Oh no, we don't provide car seats. You have to bring your own." Just like, well, we can't trek to Tokyo from Kagoshima with 2 car seats in tow. So I don't know how you expect us to do that. So yeah, definitely a pain in the ass with that. But we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about this movie.
Hey, it's Paris. You know, I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
And we are back, still discussing Happy Flight. One of the things that really kind of drove home for me with watching this movie was the fact that just how difficult a job being a flight attendant really is. And it really gives me kind of a newfound appreciation for the kind of shit they have to deal with on there. I mean, I do remember there was this one time when I was flying back from America back to Japan, and there was this other foreigner sitting next to me on the plane, and he was also living in Japan, and we talked a little bit, and at first he seemed like a nice guy, but then he started pounding the drinks and just became incredibly obnoxious, and like was trying to hit on the flight attendants and all this kind of stuff. And at one point he even took his shirt off.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he was just like, oh God, it was just one of the worst experiences of my life. And I remember as I was leaving the plane, one of the flight attendants, she pulled me aside and she's like, you were sitting next to that guy, that drunk guy, right? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, are you okay? I'm like, are you okay? This is what I should be asking.
Yeah.
Because you're the one who had to deal with it. You're the one who had to put up with his antics.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really tough job. I mean, their primary role is for safety. I mean, they are there to make sure that if anything goes wrong, they will do whatever they can to help, which we obviously saw in Japan beginning of 2024 with the accident at Haneda Airport, where the cabin crew were so professional in getting everybody off the flight and so on. But after that, they are there sort of trying to make the journey comfortable for people. And some people just don't know how to behave nicely. And so, I mean, generally Japanese passengers, I would say, tend to be quite polite, but there are exceptions. And I had 2 flights where I went between Kansai International and Taiwan, and then Taiwan back to Kansai International. For whatever reason, on both flights, I had a Yakuza person sat next to me. And the way they behaved towards the cabin crew was just completely wrong. I mean, it was literally just picking up their hand luggage and shoving it at this cabin crew person and telling them to put it in the overhead bin and everything like that. And I mean, I think if it had been anybody else, probably everybody's reaction would be slightly different. But with Yakuza, you're not going to mess around, are you? And you could just see the cabin crew was just that little bit more on edge for the whole flight, making sure that this person was happy and comfortable and so on. And, it wasn't ideal, but I think situations like that are quite rare on Japanese flights in reality. I think the average passenger tends to be fairly straightforward.
Yeah, I haven't had a lot of issues when I've flown both to Japan or also flying within Japan. I've never really had any problems with with passengers. Other than that one guy who wasn't Japanese, he was a foreigner. So there's that aspect of it too. But yeah, it's generally whenever I've had issues on flights, it's always been the Western passengers more often than not. And well, also that point you made too about the fact that they are there for safety. Like they make that point in the film too, when there's that one part where I can't remember. I think it was Yamazaki who said, or either Yamazaki. I think it was Yamazaki says to the rest of the flight attendants, she's like, "You're no longer here to provide. You're no longer service attendants. You are now security personnel." And just like how they have to switch in a minute from pleasant hospitality role to now we're here for security. It really goes to show that I think a lot of people, both people who aspire to be flight attendants and also people who just fly in general, I think they tend to look at flight attendants as if it's just, an easy service job, right? It's like, oh, you're just there, you're just serving drinks and stuff like that. There's a lot more to it than that. And I think that was and it was good that they showed that scene with the high school girls who were all excited to see Etsuko, and they're like taking pictures with her and like, oh, we want to be flight attendants too, and they're all very happy and bubbly. And I have seen that in my own students too, when there's this definite feeling like, oh yeah, I'll be a flight attendant and I'll get to fly all over the world, and all I have to do is you have like 2 days on and then you have like 3 days off, so it's a really easy job. It's like, no, there's a lot to it. It can be a very tough gig. And especially because there'll probably be times if you're flying internationally where you're not seeing your home for maybe weeks on end.
Yeah, and when you do see it, you're feeling jet lagged and so on. I mean, it is a very tough job, and the safety is so critical. I mean, it's one of the things I love about this film, is it goes straight into a safety announcement from an airplane. I really enjoyed that element to it. I did think it was quite... as I said, this film came out at the same time that Climbers High came out, which was all about the JAL crash in 1985. So to make this film straight away being talking about safety just felt like another little swipe being taken at JAL to a certain degree. But safety is such a key element to their job. And I mean, when I've spoken to exchange students in particular, some Japanese students who are just in the UK for a year, and some of them talking about going on to cabin crew, and just hearing how they think the job is going to be, and particularly for ones who said they were particularly wanted to work at JAL, it's just like, well, that's what you think it's going to be. And yes, for the first week or so, you're going to be learning how to bow properly and use Keigo and all the rest of it. But you are going to be going to the Safety Promotion Center. You will see the parts of the remains of the JL 123 flight from 1985, and you are going to be going to the crash site to see what happens when things go wrong. You're going to see they're not gravestones because they're buried elsewhere, but they're marker posts for where all the bodies were found and stuff like this. And so they get a very stark lesson in the importance of safety and getting it right and so on. And all the sort of the serving drinks and selling duty free is very much sort of not the main part of the job in many respects, even though that's the bit that we as passengers primarily only want to see them doing. We don't want to experience the actual main part of their job.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I thought there were some little tiny things too that were like, one of the things that really stuck out to me was the importance of the hat. Right. And now I don't know if this is true or not, but I thought it was a really cool thing where, Suzuki's complained about the fact they have to wear these hats. And like, why do we wear these? We don't wear them when we're flying anyway. And then he's looking at the jet engine, and, there's some oil that falls down and it hits him in his face and his shirt. And Harada's like, wait, you got some oil here on your face. And he's like, oh yeah, I guess I must. And Harada's just like, you weren't wearing your hat, were you? And Suzuki's like, no. And he's like, if that hits your eye, you would not be here right now. And now I don't know if that's the reason why they wear hats all the time, but that it made sense, at least in that moment.
It's one of those things. It goes together. I mean, it is part of the uniform. I mean, some of these things date back sort of decades and so on. Some of what happens on an airplane dates back to a lot of the protocols came from the shipping world. I mean, even some of the terminology and so on comes from shipping. So some of it is just part of the uniform. But there are often practical reasons for doing things. And you can see this throughout the film if you're looking for the clues. And this points to, I mean, we'll going back to the maintenance issue. The reason why that storyline is so ridiculous is because it even shows in the film why it wouldn't have happened. The guy has literally got a box which it has. You don't just put your tools in, it's in the shape of the tool, and you can see which tool is missing straight away. So there is no way this guy would close up a toolbox when there is a particular space for that spanner is missing. He would know straight away something is wrong. So that storyline just doesn't work, but there is a practical reason for why things are done like that, is to make sure that you've got these sort of checks and balances kind of thing, system being there.
Yeah, and that when he is working on the engine and he puts the wrench down and the other guy comes up, he's like, what are you doing? Don't ever put your tool there. Like, even if it's for a minute, right? Because if you get absent-minded, you forget about it, that could cause a huge problem. Instead, you always put it right back in the box. Again, I'm just like, it's all these things, we kind of take for granted. Like, I've got a toolbox, and whenever I'm doing stuff around the house, my tools are always going missing because I'm never putting them back where they should be. But it's not a life or death situation with my tools like it is with these people. So it's like, you have to be, I mean, I imagine that the airline industry, you need to have very strong type A people to work in this. Otherwise, shit just doesn't get done.
Yeah, and I'd seen the same thing when I started doing my research about the Shinkansen back in 2001, I suppose it was. I went to JR Central's maintenance depot at Hamamatsu, and they showed me they got exactly the same thing there, where all the tools, there's an outline drawing of it in a very distinctive color, so it's very obvious if a tool is missing. And I think they said they had been taught this by Toyota, which JR Central's essentially based from Aichi and Nagoya, like Toyota is. I think it's just gone through all the industries, because all these companies learn from each other and talk to each other and so on. I mean, A&A staff also go up to the JAL crash site as well from time to time. So they learn these safety mechanisms, and some of them are really practical. I mean, one of the things that a lot of foreigners pick up on when they travel in Japan, where if you go on the trains, even like the conventional line, you can quite often see what the driver is doing. And people spot how the driver will be pointing at signals and so on. And people think it's quite dramatic and so on. It's actually really effective. And when I was visiting JR East, and they were talking about the whole importance of pointing to signs, and I'd heard it from the other companies as well, they said, try it at home with something. They said, when you go to turn off the gas, don't just look at it to see if the gas has been turned off on the hob when you're cooking. Point to it. And I was surprised just how effective it actually is. There have been times where I've realized that I just looked down before and thought it was off, and my brain just goes, yeah, it's off. And then 5 minutes later, I find the gas is still actually on, even though there's nothing cooking. Whereas by pointing to it, it just makes a different connection in your brain. So some of these things that you even see in Happy Flight just show how the system works. And I think that's one of the things I found interesting about this film, is that there were times where you could see how it's supposed to work, and then other times where the film was just totally ridiculous. And it's just like, that's clearly not what would normally happen. I mean, one of the first scenes when we see them it transpires quite quickly they're in a flight simulator and everything. The pilots are just so panicked, and it's just like, no, pilots at that stage of their career would not be as panicked at that. This is clearly going to be just over the top film. Try not to take it seriously, but not taking it seriously and it being funny aren't necessarily the same thing.
Well, also, and to that point about like the pointing stuff and all that, you also see that when the fact that they verbalize everything they do in the cockpit, right? He's saying, VCheck and all this kind of stuff. And one of the things that stuck out to me too is the fact that the pilots, when they're doing all this stuff, even though they're both Japanese, they're still using English throughout the entire thing. And then also the flight controllers in the tower, they're all speaking in English as well. So it's just like this whole idea that we're all using it just shows you the importance of English in the flight industry, because when you're dealing, because most of this stuff originated in English speaking countries, and so that's why I assume that's why we still have that as kind of like the language of flight travel.
It's the language of flight travel. I mean, as we pick up from, as is shown in the film, where Suzuki presses the wrong button. So instead of doing an announcement to the airplane, he ends up doing an announcement to all other aircraft. Other aircraft can hear conversations as well. So it's really important that everybody's using the same language, just so everybody knows where they are, what's going on, and so on. And so English is used, but it can be a stylized English. So if you ever get to read transcripts of accident reports in Japan, where you can see what was said, you can see that it's English, but it's not grammatically correct English. It's clearly a version of English which everybody can follow what's going on and simplified. And in the case of the JAL crash of 1985, part of the communication was also being done in English because Yokota Air Base was also contacting the plane to say, you can use our runway if you need to. But because the situation was so dire, they had reported in English that the plane was uncontrollable. Air traffic control actually told them, from now on, you can use Japanese if you want. You've clearly got a lot on your plate at the moment. Just stick to Japanese if you need to. And they did use for Japanese for quite a long time. And then every now and again, they actually still slipped back into English because I think part of their brain is, we're in a cockpit situation, we use English. It's just, I think it's like a muscle memory.
Right, it just becomes
kind of thing.
it just becomes ingrained. Yeah, that's very fascinating. Another thing too that is kind of a trademark of Yaguchi's is this kind of like distrust of technology. I mean, he's, and I'm not saying this to put him down, but he is basically a Luddite. Like when Survival Family came out, he had done an interview when he said that he doesn't have a smartphone, and this Survival Family came out in 2017. So we're not talking like, 2010 when only a select few people in Japan had smartphones. We're talking like, by the point when the market is completely saturated over here in Japan with smartphones now. And he said back then, he's like, I don't have a smartphone. And, Survival Family was all about his views about how we are way too dependent on technology. And you see a little bit of that creeping into this movie too, like with the fact that they're having power trouble. So what they do is they go out and they grab the airline map and they carry it into the office, and then they're using that, and they're using like little props to simulate the air traffic stuff. So it was a really interesting thing to see, like his to see how he shows his anti-technology feelings in that scene too.
Yeah, and I mean, there are times where not using technology, it's the right way. I mean, going back to the accidents of January 2024 at Haneda Airport, I mean, there's never a single reason for an accident. It's a whole range of things that come together. But there are also ways where potentially a single thing just needs to go right and an accident doesn't happen. To stop the accident that happened at Haneda Airport in January 2024, where a JAL plane crashes down on top of a plane that's on the runway, it literally needed somebody sitting in a little like cool box type thing, just standing there looking at airplanes and going, nope, this doesn't work, and just radioing and saying, don't land. It doesn't need amazing technology. It's literally, you could pay almost like Mr. Birdman in this film, just a retired guy to just be standing there doing plane spotting, and you're not going to have an accident like that. It doesn't need clever radars and all the rest of it. It's just something very, very basic. And I think this is the problem that we're getting into in Japan now, and where I'm sure Yaguchi is going to be getting even more freaked out, is that because of the crisis of labor in Japan at the moment, just shortage of labor in certain sectors, push towards even more AI and automation and self-driving lorries and all the rest of it, there are going to be accidents coming, because sometimes we just need humans being a little bit more involved.
Yeah, it's very interesting how Japan is, and part of it is just because of the politics of the situation, where the ruling party, their base is very anti-immigrant. So the ruling party keeps resisting mass immigration moves when it's clearly what they need to solve these problems to get more people here. And instead they're like, well, what if we just have robots do it instead? It's like, okay, that's not going to solve the problem. That's going to make other problems instead. But yeah, I'm definitely with you on that. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to mention here in my notes. I did like the little moment when they're Kimura and her assistant are standing and they're waving at the plane. They're just kind of like, they're like, close your doors, don't come back.
But we also see the maintenance crew waving the plane off, which you get for all flights in Japan. That the maintenance crew will wave off planes, and I got so used to it, I expect it.
And bowing too.
By the way, yeah, I mean, if I'm by the window, I look out for it. But I've been on flights where I've been close to other foreigners, and they've seen it, and their reaction has been, do they know something that we don't? And it's just like, you're really interpreting it that way? Okay. I wasn't expecting that, but I've always liked it the way they're sort of waving off the flights and so on. It's
And also I like the scene when they're running out of the food, and Yamazaki tells her, he's like, look, the way you have to deal with this, you have to anticipate the fact that there's going to be this imbalance. So talk up one of the meals that there's an abundance of over the other one. And then, she's talking about, the beef is just plain and ordinary. And then she's talking about the rosemary scented fish and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, this is one thing which was on the receiving of bad service on Japan Airlines once, where the meal that I wanted, they said that they had run out of. And so they gave me the other one. The Japanese woman sat next to me said that she wanted the one that they've run out of, and the person explained again, sorry, we've run out of it. And she goes, oh, I can't have the other one because I got an allergy to whatever it was that was in the other meal. And lo and behold, they went scurrying off and they found her an extra meal. Yeah. And it's like, really? Okay. I'm not quite sure how that works. So, yeah. Don't always get good service on airlines.
Yeah, it's like we said, it's a tough gig, and all the kind of people, like I give them a lot of grace just because of all the stuff they have to deal with. I remember one time when I was in Thailand and flying back to Japan, and I was in Bangkok, and there was like I think it was a typhoon or something, and so like the flights were all grounded, all flights were canceled, and the other passengers, pretty much all tourists, foreign tourists, were freaking out and like shouting at this poor woman. Couldn't have been more than like 25, right? And just screaming at her about the fact that they're going to have to stay in Bangkok overnight and all this kind of stuff. And you can just see like they're one after another just keep berating her. You can see she's like on the verge of cracking. And I stepped up and I started yelling at them, and then they started yelling at me, and that gave her a chance to recover. And then as a result, she ended up giving me priority service when it came to like getting our passports back and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a tough gig, and I really feel for the people who have to work in this industry, because it's not easy, and I can't imagine dealing with some of the stuff I've seen as a passenger from other passengers, like imagining having to deal with that. I'd probably be in prison if I had to do one of those types of jobs and deal with that kind of shit.
Sure. One of the things I wanted to mention that I really liked about this film is that it uses one of my favorite types of airplane, the Boeing 747, which these days you don't get to see so much. I mean, its nickname is Queen of the Skies. It was such a beautiful design. And so there is a sort of degree of nostalgia seeing it in this particular plane. ANA allowed allowed one of their planes to be used completely free of charge for 15 days, so they could do all the filming and everything. But one of the things I noticed in the opening credits, where you get to see lots of shots of the plane and so on, and then gradually we get to see it leaving the hangar and so on, we also get a shot of some birds by the runway. So there's a nice little bit of foreshadowing right in the credits about what is going to be a key element in the story. And of course, one of the things we have to keep in mind, talking about this film now, I mean, here we are on early March 2025, we obviously know all about the miracle on the Hudson with Sully landing a plane after the bird strike. This film is several years before that, when bird strikes really weren't part of everyday vocabulary in relation to airlines for most people. So, but whereas now I think a lot of people would see this film and go, oh yeah, but we know about bird strikes kind of thing.
Yeah, and just the thing is, I didn't really know about that. And I had my best friend's husband. He flies for the military here in Japan, or at least they used to. I'm not sure if he's still here, but he had done, and he would fly routinely from like Tokyo down to Okinawa, and he would say like many times they have to land in Kagoshima. And one of the things about Kagoshima, I'm not sure if you know this, but we have a pretty active volcano here, and if there's any sort of ash in the air, they have to land right away because they can't fly. Because if any of the ash, just a little bit, gets in the engines, it could cause a massive disaster. And it's like those little tiny things that we don't think about, but they are really important for them to know about.
Yeah, yeah. So I know all about Sakurajima. The first time I went to Kagoshima, I used to wear contact lenses, and I spent most of the day crying because the ash was getting between my lens and my eyeball, and it was just my eye dried out, and so the ash was getting sandwiched between the two. I learnt whenever I go to Kagoshima now, wear glasses, and Kagoshima is now one of my favorite cities in Japan. But popped it.
It is a great place.
If you go
Yeah,
to Kagoshima, don't wear contact lenses. It's not good.
at least if you're going in if you're going in the summer, especially, the ash really kind of blows over you this way in the summer. That's where it gets really bad. Other times of year, it's not so bad. And in fact, lately it hasn't been that bad. I remember when I first came here, the first few years I was here, it was like constant. But now it's seems to have mellowed a little bit.
Just on the subject of.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, just on the subject of weather and so on, I did like the bits in the film where they're talking about the weather, even when they're still before boarding the flight and so on. I mean, I've seen this being done when I visited airline companies. It was very authentic, and it just reminded me of a BBC news story that I recently saw. It was actually filmed in 1958 or thereabouts, talking about how the plane type jet plane called a Comet was going to now be used by BOAC, which is nowadays British Airways, was reducing the flight time to Japan to only 36 hours or something. I mean, it was like it would hop around the world to get there. One of the things that was quite interesting watching that news report, I mean, it was terrible at one level. Some of the language and so on is just not appropriate in the modern day and age and so on, and shouldn't have been used even then. But they actually had some BOAC crew saying, cockpit crew sort of saying, we don't know what the winds are going to be like flying around Japan and so on. I found it quite difficult watching that because of how prophetic it ended up being, because in 1966, a BOAC plane crashed onto Mount Fuji due to the wind conditions. And was the anniversary of that crash only 2 days ago.
Oh, wow. But yeah, do you have is there anything else you wanted to mention about this film? Like, the only other thing I wanted to note is Etsuko's father is played by Akira Emoto, who's a pretty big name in the Japanese film industry. I thought it was so funny that he just pops up in here just for that one little part, and that I don't even think he has any lines. You got this really big name actor in just like this tiny one scene here.
Yeah, I mean, I love the actor Harada, or the actor who plays Harada as Saburo Tokito. I've seen him do these sort of roles quite a lot. He was in the Umizaru TV series and movies and so on, doing quite a similar sort of role, and I think it works very well. I liked quite a lot of the portrayal of what goes on inside the plane in terms of the friction between the cockpit crew and the cabin crew. I think that's quite realistic. What else did I spot? Only a very small story in the end, but we see a child traveling by himself, which is done quite a lot in Japan. We don't really have that so much in the UK. And here there's a parallel with the JAL crash of 1985, where one of the most well-known sort of stories related to that was a 12-year-old boy who is traveling by himself. Sorry, 9-year-old boy who was traveling by himself for the first time. So again, there's just like making those little links with sort of aviation stories that many Japanese people would potentially be familiar with, and so on. But the one other thing I liked, I think, because obviously in this film, the cockpit crew are male and then the cabin crew are female, which is very authentic at one level. But I did like it towards the end of the film when we have, I don't know if this is a word. I mean, I know mansplaining, but we have womansplaining, I think is the only way to describe it, where one of the female people in the air traffic control building are showing the men how to enlarge a photograph. And I did like that sort of element that there are certain things the women, we know what we're doing. We can do it better than you men.
I didn't think that was funny too. It just like shows like the lack of understanding of technology, but which happens with a lot of older guys here. And like I'm in the process right now, like you said, it's early March when we're recording this. I'm in the process of trying to do my Japanese tax returns, and they have it all online now. And whoever designed the website deserves to be shot, because it's just unbelievably unnecessarily overcomplicated, and it's just such a pain in the ass to use.
A lot of these websites, they've basically taken, this is what it looked like when it was the paper version. How do we make it look like the paper version? It's just like, no, you don't do it that way. On the subject of websites, right at the end of the credits of the film, it brings up the website for the film, www.happyflight.jp. I double checked, the website is still active. There are still details about the movie, and various blog posts related to it are still up as well at the moment.
That's interesting. Yeah, sometimes you will have that every now and then when these ghost websites still exist. And this looks like it's a fan site for it, so it looks like it's but it's kind of funny. I guess maybe what happened is maybe the fan site bought it. Then again, these blog posts are like, there's the most recent. Yeah. I don't know. So it's very fascinating. Anyway, so that's all I really have to say about Happy Flight. And, it's not Yaguchi's best movie, but it's a fun movie. And like we said, surprisingly, not that very much of a happy flight. And even though it is endorsed by ANA, it's not the best depiction of ANA, which is, both ways are kind of amusing to me.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think because bits of it are just so silly, I think ANA could just feel as though people aren't going to think bad about ANA. And in the meantime, they're just going to see the ANA branding. And there were some very interesting choices and placements of adverts throughout the film, sort of, where it's just like, clearly this is trying to get the message out there that ANA is now an international airline. It's growing. It's a fun airline. And I think this is probably what they really wanted to achieve with the film, is just sort of say that, look, ANA is prepared to do something as silly as this and be involved with something as silly as this. We're not like those boring people over at JAL kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Christopher, thanks so much for coming on. And why don't you tell people where they can find you?
Okay, so the easiest things are to go to Linktree. So that's linktr.ee/hoodcp, HOODCP. There you can find links to all my social media. Or if you just want to go straight to my homepage, it's tiny.cc/ and then hoodcp again. That'll get you to my website, and there you can find details about my novels, my academic books, all my research about planes, trains, and everything else that I do as well.
Okay, awesome. We'll have links to that stuff in the show notes, so please make sure to check those out. As for us, japanonfilm.com is the website, and Japan on Film is who we are on Blue Sky, which is the main social network we're on these days, although we also post updates on Instagram and Facebook and Threads as well. Japan on Film at all of those. And we are part of the Film Stories Podcast Network, so please make sure to listen up and hear what else is coming up on the network. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
The Japan on Film podcast is produced by me, Perry Constantine, in conjunction with the Film Stories Podcast Network. Visit japanonfilm.com for show notes, episodes, and information about being a guest yourself. You can also reach out to me on the website's contact form if you have questions or comments about Japanese movies or the show itself. The show is at Japan on Film on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram, so please be sure to follow us. If you'd like to support the show, you can donate on japanonfilm.com, purchase from our advertisers, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Join the Film Stories Podcast Network Discord from the link in the show notes to connect with me and many other cinema fans and podcasters.